In today's video, I want to give you guys a look through on a massive PlayStation 5 update. Wired has got you guys covered yet again, and they've got an exclusive, a deeper look at the PlayStation 5. I want to read from the article, give you guys my input, and I'll leave a link to the article as well in the description box below if you guys want to check it out for yourself. But a lot of information has been revealed about the impending release of the PlayStation 5. We have an official release window, we've got the name confirmed. I think the name was what a lot of us were expecting, but nonetheless, let's talk about it. The article notes, ever since the original PlayStation hit the market in 1994, Sony's series of video game consoles has stuck to the numbers. No Super, no Max, no Code Red Extreme, just PlayStation 2, 3, and 4 with such unwavering consistency. The name of the next iteration has been a question only in the most technical sense, but Sony CEO Jim Ryan is still ready to answer it. The console, he tells me, will be called the PlayStation 5. It's nice to be able to say it like a giant burden has been lifted off my shoulders. That's from Jim Ryan himself. So the console is in fact called PlayStation 5. It's not going to be like PlayStation Maximus Scorpion or PlayStation Vermilion or PlayStation this is the biggest console we've ever released ever. No, let's keep things simple. Let's keep things aesthetic. PlayStation 5 is the console, and PlayStation 5 will be dropping holiday 2020. So there you have it, the official release window, which I also think a lot of us were expecting, but it's nice to have some clarity and some confirmation. The article continued, Sony hasn't said too much about the console since April when Wired broke the story about development efforts on what was known only as the next-gen console. In fact, the company hasn't said anything. Sony skipped Games Show E3 this year, a void during which Microsoft unveiled details about its own next-gen console. I think everybody and their mother knew why Sony was skipping E3. There wasn't really a lot of reason for them to be there. Yes, they have stuff on the pipeline for the PlayStation 4, but it's not like they have massive amounts of stuff to release. We already know about Death Stranding, we know about Last of Us Part 2, we knew about Ghost of Tsushima, and if you're coming to E3, you gotta come packed with a couple of surprises, and right now I just don't think Sony is ready to reveal those said surprises because they are next generation titles from Guerrilla Games, from Sony Santa Monica, from a lot of other studios. Even Insomniac is probably decently along with their next generation project, and they are a first party studio now, so there wasn't really reason for them to be at E3. However, at E3, Microsoft did hold their conference, and like the PS5, Scarlett will boast a CPU based on AMD's Ryzen line and GPU based on its Navi family, and like the PS5, it will ditch the spinning hard drive for a solid-state drive. That's one of the key talking points when talking about the PlayStation 5 and next-gen in general. SSDs are the wave of the future, which is pretty cool. Mark Cerny also shared some specifics, and before they do, Cerny wants to clarify something. Noted in the Wired article, when we last discussed the forthcoming console, he spoke about its ability to support ray tracing, a technique that can enable complex lighting and sound effects in 3D environments. Given the many questions he's received since, he fears he may have been ambiguous about how PlayStation 5 would accomplish this, and confirms that it's not a software level fix, which some had feared. There is ray tracing acceleration in the GPU hardware, which I believe is the statement that people were looking for. Very interesting to me because that means that GPU is boasting a ton of power. Ray tracing is not something that comes along cheap. Even the top of the line PCs have trouble running ray tracing at optimal performance and settings. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different on a console and optimizing things, but it's a comparison worth having. And of course, going back to one of the PlayStation 5's integral elements, the solid-state drive, that is going to be a massive addition to the PS5's repertoire, and which Cerny first talked about, it can turn loading time from a hassle to a blink. It's not just the speed that makes the SSD formidable, he says, but the efficiency it offers. Think about the hard drive in a game console spinning like a 5400 RPM vinyl record. For a console to read a piece of information of the drive, it's a lot more of a process than just on an SSD where it's all flash memory. Each seek, as it's known, may only entail a scant handful of milliseconds, but seeks add up, and this will add up to load times and things just taking a little while to process. To minimize them, developers will often duplicate certain assets in order to form data blocks which the drive can read faster. However, once you start duplicating stuff, you guys probably can understand what's gonna happen. The game file sizes are just gonna be inherently bigger. Cerny noted, if you look at a game like Marvel Spider-Man, there are some pieces of data duplicated 400 times on the hard drive. The SSD sweeps away the need for all that duping, so not only is its raw read speed dramatically faster than a hard drive, but it saves crucial space. And of course, with the next generation of gaming, games are going to be incredibly big from a file size standpoint, and if we were sticking to the traditional hard drives, it would probably be a train wreck. So this is just very good, all things considered. However, if you talk about game installation, which is mandatory given the speed difference between the SSD and the optical drive, that'll be a bit different than in the PS4. This time around, aided in part by the simplified game data possible with the SSD, Sony is changing its approach to storage, making for a more configurable installation and removal process. Rather than treating games like a big block of data, we're allowing finer-grained access to the data. That could mean the ability to install just the game's multiplayer, or just install campaign, leaving the single-player campaign for another time, or just installing the whole thing and then being done with it. We've seen that often with PC games, but it's not something that's done super regularly. But if you look at some of the older Call of Duty titles, a lot of those games, you can install just the multiplayer and play that, or you can install just the campaign and play that. Maybe that's what they're going for here. In the case of a purely single-player game, I feel like it would be a little bit hard to segment off installation pieces. You would probably just have to install the whole thing, so just bear that in mind as well. Regardless of what parts of a game you choose to install and play, you'll be able to stay with it via a completely revamped user interface. The PlayStation 4, of course, has a relatively bare-bones home screen, which I honestly really like. I like the simplistic look of the PlayStation 4. Some people might want something that's a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more cluttered is the right word, since that just has a negative connotation attached to it. But yeah, let's say it, a little bit more cluttered. I compare the PlayStation 4's user interface to the Xbox One. I much prefer the PlayStation 4's, but that's a personal preference. Whatever the case may be, the PlayStation 5 is going to be changing its interface a little bit. Even though it will be fairly fast to boot games, we don't want the player to have to boot the game, see what's up. Multiplayer game servers will provide the console with the set of joinable activities in real time. Single-player games will provide information like what missions you could do and what rewards you might receive for completing them, and all of those choices will be visible in the UI. As a player, you just jump right into whatever you like. So it seems like it's really trying to get the content to the player as quick as possible. But how does the UI actually look like? And how big will the SSD be? Or is there a microphone? That's exactly what was asked, and Cerny handed a prototype of the next generation controller, an unlabeled matte black doohickey that looks an awful like the PlayStation 4's DualShock 4. After all, there's a little hole on it, and recently published patent points to Sony developing a voice-driven AI assistant for the PlayStation. But all they got from Cerny is, we'll talk more about it another time. We file patents on a regular basis, and a spokesperson followed up saying, and like many other companies, some of those patents end up in our products and some don't. So a lot of speculation, a lot of uncertainty regarding the controller, but whatever the case may be, the DualShock 5 does seem to be implementing some new things. However, I called it the DualShock 5. Cerny did note that the controller does not yet have a name, so that's just me calling the DualShock 5 based on me being accustomed to calling these controllers DualShock 3, DualShock 4, whatever the case may be. But there you have it with that. Combined with an improved speaker on the controller, the haptics could enable some astonishing effects. Wired played through a series of short demos courtesy of the same Japan studio team that designed PlayStation VR's Astrobot Rescue Mission. In the most impressive, they ran a character through a platform level featuring a number of different surfaces, all of which gave distinct and surprisingly immersive tactile experiences. Sand was said to feel slow and sloggy, mud felt slow and soggy. On ice, a high-frequency response made the thumbsticks really feel like the character was gliding, jumping into a pool. They got a sense of resistance of the water on a wooded bridge, a bouncy sensation, so it seems like there's a lot of responsiveness, which I can definitely get behind. And also, a version of GT Sport that Sony had ported over to the PS5 dev kit, a dev kit that on quick glance looks a lot like the one that Gizmodo reported on last week. The company did refuse to comment on questions about how the dev kit's form factor might compare to what's being considered for the consumer product, so the final iteration come holiday 2020. The consumer product does see a lot of evolution versus the dev kit. The dev kit, you're just trying to get something with the core equipment that is easy to work on and everything like that. Driving on the border between the track and the dirt, they could feel both surfaces. Doing the same thing on the same track using a DualShock 4 on a PS4, that sensation disappeared entirely. It wasn't that the old style rumble feedback paled in comparison, it was that there was no feedback at all. User tests found the rumble feedback was too tiring to use continuously, so the release version of GT Sport simply didn't even use it. Product manager Toshi Aoki says the controller team has been working on haptic feedback since the DualShock 4 was in development. They even could have included it in the PS4 Pro, the mid-cycle refresh, though doing so would have created a split experience. That's what we always talk about when creating two separate platforms within a console generation. You can split the user base, and now you're really splitting the experience. In the case of the PS4 Pro, yes, there are some performance improvements, but generally speaking, the experience is very similar. In the case of offering haptic feedback on a controller, I guess at that point, they were like, okay, this is going to offer too much of a split experience. So whatever the case may be, the feature suite was held for the next generation. And there are some other small improvements over the DualShock 4. The next-gen controller uses a USB Type-C connector for charging, and you can play through the cable as well. Its larger capacity battery and haptics motor makes the new controller a bit heavier than the DualShock 4, but Aoki says that it will come in a bit lighter than the current Xbox controller with batteries in it. How the studios themselves use all of these new features, how they utilize the SSD, that is of course imperative. Sony is going to offer the suite of features, but it's up to the developers to actually optimize their games and utilize all of these features. Are they going to want to use haptic feedback in every game? Are they going to want to optimize their game entirely for an SSD? And ray tracing acceleration is going to be a little bit of a performance hurdle if the game inherently has fantastic visuals. I'm not a game developer, but just generally knowing how these things work, it's going to be up to the developers to implement a lot of these features. Just because the GPU supports ray tracing, it's not a God-given fact that every game is going to suddenly run at 4K 60 FPS and have ray tracing enabled. Even if they say that the PlayStation 5 supports 8K, that suddenly doesn't mean that the PlayStation 5 is going to be playing every game at 8K, so keep your expectations in line, especially if this is a $400 box. And it was also noted, while a number of studios already had their PS5 dev kits, the controller prototypes began rolling out much more recently, and no one is ready to name specific titles they're developing for the PS5. We're working on a big one right now, says Marco Thrush, president of Bluepoint Games. Bluepoint Games, we know, is working on a remake, so there we have it confirmed. It is a PS5 game, not a PS4 remake, so let the speculation begin. Is that Demon's Souls? Is that something else entirely? And Thrush followed up saying, I'll let you figure out the rest. Thrush also added, the SSD has me really excited. You don't need to do gameplay hacks anymore to artificially slow players down, lock them behind doors, anything like that. Back in the cartridge days, games used to load instantly. We're kind of going back to what consoles used to be. Also, Chief Studio Officer for EA, Laura Miel, spoke, I could be really specific and talk about experimenting with ambient occlusion techniques or the examination of ray trace shadows. More generally, we're seeing the GPU be able to power machine learning for all sorts of really interesting advancements in the gameplay and other tools. And it was also noted we're stepping into the generation of immediacy in mobile games. We expect a game download to download in moments and to be just a few taps from jumping right in. Now we're able to tackle that in a big way. I hate whenever console gaming is compared to mobile games, but mobile games aren't all evil. They do have some quality elements, and I guess the immediacy factor is something they're trying to replicate in console gaming. And that's gonna conclude this video. Again, I'm gonna leave the entire Wired article in the description box below. If you want to check it out for yourself, feel free, but I went over the majority of the information and gave my input as well. Exciting to really hear more about the PlayStation 5. We know it's gonna be called the PS5. We know that it's coming holiday 2020. We know the SSD is gonna be a big element to it, and the controller seems to be boasting a host of improvements as well. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.